Brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for making the time for joining us today for this training on accessing grants. This training has come about because back in December, the Bristol and Bath Parks Foundation ran a small consultation with friends of and park groups across both Bristol and Bath to understand what are some of the kind of key issues that they're thinking about and ways in which we could provide some support to help make this year, when hopefully, fingers crossed, it's looking good, we're able to be back out in our parks and green spaces a little bit easier. So key themes that kind of came out from that were introducing more nature to parks, and I recognise quite a few names from the conference that we ran a few weeks ago, and fundraising, particularly accessing grants through trusts and foundations, was the very close second in terms of interest. Now, I'm really delighted that we're able to put this on for you. And yes, we've got Jo Byron here, who is Trusts and Foundations consultant. She's got around 15 years of fundraising through trusts and foundations kind of experience under her belt. And she's currently our Trusts and Foundations consultant as well. She's brought in some grants for us over the last year or so that's funded our first pilot projects out in parks. We're now in a position where we're working together on getting some bigger money in, which is really exciting. So I'm pleased to see that there are some more people joining as I'm talking, which is great. So welcome. If you're newly here, please do introduce yourselves in the chat box so we can get to know everybody in the room. So it's quite a large kind of meeting that we've got today. We're expecting about 25 people to join by the time we get going. So in terms of some tech issues, the usual housekeeping, I will be keeping you all on mute for the majority of the meeting. If you have any questions for Jo or any topics that you'd like to discuss with the other people in the room, please use the chat function. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout, and as Jo's speaking, if there are any questions that are kind of burning or really pertinent, I'll make sure that they get asked at the right time. We've only got 2 hours and there's quite a lot to get through. So prepare yourselves. We are going to run a whistle-stop tour through everything you need to think about when making trusts and foundation applications to access grants. But yes, I think we are probably ready to go. So I'm going to share my screen now, which has Jo's presentation. So it would be great if you can let me know with thumbs up that you can all see that. Is that visible for everybody?
Thumbs up.
I can see thumbs up. That's excellent. Brilliant stuff. So without further ado, I'm, as I say, delighted that Jo's able to do this for us. She's a real expert in this field and has experience of getting money in for parks projects already. So yeah, Jo, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charlie. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all. So I'm really delighted to be doing this session today. For me, a key objective is to tailor everything that I'm saying to those of you who are running friends of groups, whether they be informal groups, whether you are perhaps constituted, a formal constituted group, or in fact a registered charity. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to cover off what you're able to get funding for, dependent on what kind of group you are. And also, I think it is fair to say, as Charlie's mentioned, that it is going to be quite a speedy session because there is quite a lot to get through. So Charlie, if you're happy to go to the first slide, I shall begin. So the objectives, the main objectives are to, first of all, identify which funders you can apply to. So this is based on how you are set up, whether it's an informal group, whether it's a constituted group or a registered charity, how to plan, structure and write applications that are going to stand the best chance of being chosen. And then I'd like to cover a little bit on reporting, but also on how to develop relationships with funders to increase your success rate. Charlie, you okay to move that along? Okay, so first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about, had feedback from many of you to explain what kind of group you are at the moment. So that's the first thing I really want to cover off. So if you are an informal Friends of group, that is potentially the most challenging in terms of funding. I believe that the SIL money, and we'll talk a bit more about that shortly, is available to you both in Bristol and in Bath. There are slightly different methods for applying for that. But most of what we're talking about today, whether it be the lottery, whether it be the Heritage Lottery, whether it be your community foundation, Awards for All, small trusts and foundations that are local to you, etc., etc., you are going to need to be a constituted group. Now, if you're not, and you don't want to be, then one of the things to consider is whether you can team up with a constituted group, such as a residents association or a registered charity or some other group in your locality that's also doing work, who could potentially partner up with you, and you could apply through them, and that's one way that you can access more money. Now, as a constituted group, and the Parks Forum are very happy to help with this, the process is not as onerous as it might seem. Essentially, you need to prove that you're charitable, so you need to have a management committee or board of trustees or directors, at least 3 unpaid and unrelated members, a constitution, which is a set of rules which can be quite straightforward and succinct, a bank account, and from your first year onwards, some kind of simple set of accounts. You need to make notes of your meetings, and these days you also need to have some safeguarding policies in place. And a lot of that information and support is available, as I say, from the Parks Forum and from many other groups that are constituted. And then the third type is likely to be a registered charity. For you, you can almost apply for just about anything that's out there. As a registered charity, you might also be a CIC or constituted as a CIO, just to make sure I've covered that off. But these are essentially the 3 types of group that you may be. And depending on which one you are, you're able to access some funds and not others. Any questions about that at all, please do put that in the chat room. Charlie, are you happy to move on to the next slide? So let's actually have a look at some of the key funders. So firstly, as I said, there's the community infrastructure.
I found it.
Which is also known as Section 106 money. And that's quite a key one for Friends of Groups. And just to say a little bit about that, I think there's quite a lot going on around that in Bristol at the moment. There's a lot of funds going through, and to access that funding in Bristol normally involves working through your local councillor. We'll talk more about that a bit later on, and getting them on board, getting their support, and then if you are successful, I think generally funds are released via the council, so the cash doesn't actually come to the Friends of Group. In Baines, in Bath, the situation is slightly different, as well as obviously still wanting to work through your local councillor, your parks coordinator, etc. You can apply directly for funding, and that can be found on the Baines Council website. And there are 2 different application forms. One is an express form if you're looking for under 5,000, and then there's a main grant application, so it's 5,000 and over. I can't remember what the maximum is at the moment, but it must be at least 40, 50,000, I think, if not more. And SIL money, Section 106 money, is generally for capital works, so whether it's equipment, buildings, benches, etc. Next, I just wanted to now talk to you a little bit about the typical charitable trust or foundation. Now, there are absolutely thousands of these, and normally a charity will sort of hone or any group will hone those down to perhaps 20 or 30, maybe more if they're quite a big organisation that they will be applying to. One of the key prerequisites for charitable trusts and foundations normally is, in the vast majority of cases, is that they want a people focus to the work, as well as the maintenance work or the environmental impact. They're very keen that all work has an advantage to people who may be currently disadvantaged in some way. But I just want to say a little bit more about that. There are still plenty of grants to cover your work if you don't wish to do that, but charitable trusts and foundations are a brilliant way to raise ongoing funds for the work that you wish to do. So the people focus really, in many cases, is just about doing the work that you already want to do, but involving people in that work. So for example, if you're operating in an area of multiple deprivation, it may just be working with local residents to give them the opportunity to be outside, to connect, to create community cohesion. But for example, with adults with learning disabilities, it may also be for them to learn new skills. They may have been very isolated anyway, but particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we come out and about, we want to help them to meet, to be out and working in their communities. You know, this is something that but we also say, for example, carers. At the Bristol and Bath Parks Foundation, we're doing some work with carers. It might be old people, it might be people who are youth offenders, all sorts of different things. But by involving them in the work that you want to do, to build your wall or create your orchard or meadow, whatever it is, you're also creating benefits for these groups, and that then opens up a very, very large number of potential trusts and foundations. And of course, they will then pay for those groups of people to be supervised by someone such as Avon Wildlife Trust, or a freelance park ranger, or somebody who's experienced at doing this sort of work and may even be experienced at working with particular groups of people. So there are grants available to cover all of that sort of work, as well as, of course, the work that you want to do within the park itself. Then, of course, there's the National Lottery Community Fund, which used to be, when it was under £10,000, I think it was called Awards for All, which is also a very popular one. And as long as you can demonstrate that you're involving the community, so again, there has to be some way in which the local community will benefit. Of course, that may be the case just by having improved facilities, etc., within the park, greater access, etc., more recreational opportunities. But if you are also working with a group of people, that's also very helpful, but that doesn't have to be. So that's a really good one for a lot of friends of groups. And there are other funds over £10,000, such as Improving Lives or Reaching Communities, in fact up to £500,000 before you even need to start consulting with the lottery. You could simply put in an expression of interest up to that amount straight away. Of course, Heritage Lottery as well, which has quite a number of different grants, is a very important funder. Parks and green spaces count as heritage, so an absolutely key funder for this work. The Community Foundation, and there are community foundations in all regions of the UK, but for us it's Quartet Community Foundation, and they run a number of different funds, and they manage funds for other people, such as Bristol Water or Wessex Water, as well as running their own funds. A very good one is the Quartet Express Fund. It also has a quick turnaround time. It's up to about £5,000. Postcode Community Trust is actually, I don't know if anybody's come across this one. It's slightly more difficult to find, but it's worth digging around to find it, as I did just recently, because the local grants element, when you first go onto this site, it looks like it's for projects in Wales. Put your postcode in, and then it tells you actually it's currently covering the west of England. So they normally want to see something around health and well-being or environmental impact. It may just be environmental impact without anything else. So that's also a very good one. In fact, we've put in an application ourselves just recently at the Bristol and Bath Parks Foundation. That fund is open, it opens monthly from the first of the month for 15 days or until they have received 100 eligible applications. Society of Merchant Ventures is a Bristol-based one. They are currently including in their criteria environmental work. We have received funding from them, so that's one to think about if you are Bristol-based. There's also a Comic Relief Fund. I don't believe it's open at the moment, but I think it will be opening again. We recently received funding from that for a pilot project, and it's the Local Community Fund, which is managed by an organisation called Openworks. That's certainly worth having a look at. Then you have a range of corporate trusts, so such as Aviva Community Fund, Zurich Community Trust, NatWest. These are ones that are very interesting in supporting local work, or Tesco Bags of Help. That's not listed on here. I suggest making a note of it. That's also a very good one again. Now, in some cases with these, they go to a vote, and that can be quite difficult. There tends to be projects that are very much about supporting children or animals. But in fact, the ones I've listed there, I think Aviva might go to a vote, but the other ones don't. So they could be really good ones to think about. Local corporate trusts, such as Irwin Mitchell, Burgess Salmon, Novia Foundation, are certainly worth looking at. And local council grants. So we've had funding from Keynsham Town Council for a litter picking project. Frome Town Council, that's my town council here, but it's a bit out of the geography. But certainly another one to think about. And then finally, the other one I just wanted to touch on was landfill grants. Previously, they were, excellent, but the funding has unfortunately reduced. I think the prerequisites were previously if you were within 10 miles from a landfill site. Now I think they're 5 miles, so that's shrunk that down, but it's certainly worth having a look. The national body, I think it's called Entrust, and they manage all of them, so you can put your postcode in just to check. I think some local ones are Ibstock, Enivert, and Enivert Community Trust. Charlie. Thank you. So what will they fund? Well, they will fund all sorts of things, whether it's revenue costs, so that's the costs of doing the work of the project. So it could be building and maintenance work, it could be planting, building ponds, putting up display boards. It's the actual work involved. It could be training and educational activities. It could be paying for park rangers, as I mentioned previously, to supervise other people to support you to carry out that work, as well as benefiting them as well. It could be, if you are a registered charity, there are large trusts who will, of course, pay for permanent staff for up to 3 years, salaries and all the associated costs. So just showing you a range of things there. Capital costs. So generally, SIL grants, as I said, and landfill grants are for capital costs. But capital costs are the costs of equipment, panel boards, display boards, building materials, concrete, stones, bricks, timber, plants, seeds, trees are also considered capital. Transport, for example, with larger charities might actually be for a van or some large piece of equipment. And again, for large registered charities, they can go to large trusts for building costs. And then finally, on this, I just want to say, well, the other thing, of course, is running costs. So for larger organisations, there will be general running costs. So, I mean, so they'll be employing people like to run HR and to do administrative work and what have you, and they can ask for a portion of that towards any project. But we're also talking here about the running costs of the specific project, whether it's travel, refreshments, you need to rent some space, etc. And the thing to do where you can, and trusts and other funders will say where you can't, but build a proportion of your overall cost, build in the costs of travel, refreshments, etc., your overheads and your running costs. Charlie. So key places to look. The Charity Commission website is a key place really when you're looking at trusts and foundations who are all registered charities themselves, although they work in a slightly different way, which is mainly about issuing grants. They are registered charities, and you will be able to do some searches under advanced search to identify trusts. You can put in the geography and you can put in the criteria, so environmental work, etc. So another key one is Funding Central. That's also a really good, it's got some great searches on there for you. Grants, resources, information news, Grin. I haven't used that for a long time, but I believe it's very useful. Grant Finder, that's a subscription one. And there's also another one that I haven't put on there called trustfunding.org. And that's also a subscription one that I used to use. But I find that using the free ones is enough to get me all the information I need, because when you sign up, certainly to things like Funding Central, you will get alerts when new trusts emerge or when they open up new programs, so that you'll always be up to date with what's going on. Open Charities is another good one because it also gives you quite a bit of information about each funder. Again, one I haven't used for a while is the Association of Charitable Foundations, but that's another possibility as well. Charlie, do you mind? Thank you. Oh. So once you've identified that there may be a particular funder, first of all, they may have a website. And a lot do these days, certainly a lot of the bigger ones. So check all the details about whether you meet their criteria, and also how you go about making your application. They might have an online application that you have to complete, or you can post it, or these days you can email it. And then check their accounts on the Charity Commission website is a really, really good way of finding out whether there's a likelihood and how strong that likelihood is that they're going to potentially fund you. So when you, under the Find a Charity, you put the details of the trust in, and then you click onto their latest annual report and accounts. And once you look inside that document, they are now legally bound to list everybody they funded in that year, and how much they've funded them, and sometimes what for. So you can see whether there are other friends of groups or organisations like yourself, and whether they funded this sort of work in parks and green spaces. And that's another way of deciding, because at the end of the day, it is a bit of a judgment call whether you think they're worth applying to or not. And thank you, Charlie. So now we're going to move on to the sort of key elements of an application, the sorts of things you're going to have to talk about. I'm listing them all here, but then I'm going to go into the detail of them. So Charlie, if you're happy to move on to the next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So the first thing is that they want to know about is about you as a group. Some information about you. In this part, it's really like telling a story. Why did you become a group? What was the need? How did you identify it? How did you all come together? Who founded the group? How many people you have now? So it's telling a bit of a story about you as an organisation, and your aims and objectives. What are the key things that you're doing? Who's involved and their relevant skills and experience. So your track record, work to date, because anybody that's looking at whether to fund you or not, as I'm sure you're aware, it's about convincing them, making them feel confident that you are an organisation that will deliver if the money is released, and that you have actually done work already. Doesn't matter even if it's not work that's been funded before. If it is work that's been funded before, please do shoehorn that into the application somewhere, because that really is a confidence builder for grant assessors. So any dates, any work you've done to date, but also what has the impact been? What's the difference that work has made? And I would certainly put some feedback in there, whether it's just a quote or a testimonial or something, so that you're actually building confidence all the time. Other things you might want to put in that section is any partnerships, because that's a really, really strong point for funders. They really like to see that you very much are rooted in the community, and by that you're also connected up and working with loads of other groups within your community. Thanks, Charlie. So the first thing we often get asked in these applications is, well, what's the need? What is the need for the work that you're proposing to do? And so I've given some examples of need here, and I've backed that up with evidence. There's more coming, but I just wanted to show you that in terms of evidence. So, for example, one way, if you're in a community where there's, for example, what's considered to be deprivation, there is an index that you can go to that is run by the government, and it can tell you, if you don't know that, it can tell you whether your area is in the top 10% ranked of the top lowest in terms of poverty, so 10% or 20%. And that's actually quite an important thing. There are trusts now that actually only want to support charitable work that is supporting people in the bottom 10% in terms of poverty. But that information is readily available. Now, Bristol City Council do some very good analysis work with their statistical ward profiles. And in this case, we were able to say that only 49% of residents were satisfied with their local park in the area where we've run a pilot, compared to 68% for Bristol as a whole. And again, less felt they were part of the communities. It's all really important evidence to put in the application. And then there are all kinds of reviews, etc., like the Space to Thrive Rapid Evidence Review, January last year, which talks about access to green spaces and how important it is to mental well-being and life satisfaction, etc., etc. And there are many other reports like that, and it's worth doing some Google searches to find some of those of your own and to quote and reference them within your application. Charlie, okay. Thank you. So I mentioned some of those. There's also a document called the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment. I'm not sure how up to date these are, but it's worth checking. I think Bristol probably will be. It's quite a key document because it talks about health and well-being in each county, but then in each district, each locality. There might be things that are produced by the Clinical Commissioning Group. There's government policy documents. I mentioned the Multiple Deprivation Index, ward profiles in Bristol, Space to Thrive, and many, many others. Those are just a few of them, really. Charlie? Thank you. So having established a need and reference, provided evidence for that need, there is also a need to produce evidence that actually the thing that you think that needs to happen is the thing that people want. And this is now absolutely key, a key theme coming through in funding applications. Have we actually consulted with people locally to know that the thing that we're proposing is what they want, and how involved have they been in that, and how involved in fact will they be in delivering the project? We'll come to that a bit later. And there are many ways that you could have consulted. You can consult with them. I know that many of you do, but so it could be that you've done an online Facebook consultation. There are many different Facebook groups in each locality, including postcode groups. SurveyMonkey is a very good way of doing it, and it's free if you're asking less than 10 questions. I think there's a way of signing up to SurveyMonkey. I don't know what it is. I'm not the best person in terms of IT, I must admit, but I'm sure Charlie will have used many SurveyMonkey, so we can ask her at the end. And you might want to send information out via different forms of social media. And I do believe that there is in fact social media training coming up soon that is also being run by Bristol Park and Bath Parks Foundation and Bristol Parks Forum. So that might well be worth attending. But you could take printed copies to distribute in the park, or you can put up posters. Local schools is another excellent one. And normally they'll put information like that, surveys and things, in their school newsletters. So you're building up as much evidence as you can from different parts of the community, scouts and youth groups, etc. Okay, Charlie. Oh, thank you. So again, so having decided on your mechanisms and having got feedback from people, you're then in a very strong position when you're writing your applications. So, for example, here, this is something we used quite recently. So, a detailed consultation about X Park was completed in September 2020. 121 residents, that's actually a really good number, completed online surveys, and 48 people attended drop-in sessions that were run. So 93% supported the idea of a nature improvement area within the park, and 79% said they would be prepared to volunteer to support nature improvements. And then there were some specific things that we also want to do in that park. So we talked about marking out walking and running routes, and we were able to take evidence that that's something that people wanted, and more sports and activities. So now I wanted to just say a little bit, if you are working with people, a little bit about beneficiaries. Charlie, you okay to move to the next one? So I think one of the things to say here is that when people are involved, it's important, obviously, for so many reasons, but people give to people. So even an assessor will make that connection, even though you're the conduit for that. If it's going to benefit other people, that can only be a good thing. And of course, it helps to create community cohesion, helps to get more people aware of the work that you're doing in the park, etc. So it's just saying a little bit about, if you are working with people, who those people are, what might be some of the issues that they're experiencing, and a little bit of evidence to support that. Okay, Charlie, thank you. Oh, that's a bit small. Sorry. I hope you can read that. So you'll be asked about the aims and objectives for the project. So here is an example of something we did, and I'll just go through it very quickly. So we wanted to support people with learning disabilities and autism to improve their mental well-being, help them learn new skills, increase community engagement opportunities for them. We wanted to create volunteering opportunities. We wanted to develop that community cohesion, connect local people with green spaces and each other. And I've highlighted what the typical ones might be, but just to show you that as well as those, there's a whole range of other ones, but perhaps that might be very familiar to you would be to deliver activities that improve run-down areas of the park, reduce antisocial behaviour, increase biodiversity and awareness of environmental issues, but there are probably many others as well, increasing access, recreational opportunities, etc. But for us, there were some other things as well, as there normally are. So testing our approach to running these pilots, developing funding opportunities, moving forward for a permanent park ranger, park activator, look at how we're developing our outcome reporting and monitoring. We'll talk about that shortly. Gather data and qualitative feedback about the impact on people's lives, learn about the wider community. And so you can see there's quite a few things. And of course, with COVID-19, that's a really key one to get in there as well. So and there's many different aspects to that, including isolation. So that's just to show you that also, although there are some sort of key obvious ones, there could be many different outcomes. So here, another way of describing a project, I just wanted to demonstrate that sometimes it's easy just to say, and this is not to do, it doesn't really matter what the project is, but so this was a service where psychotherapists meet weekly for one-to-one therapy with women on benefits who have suffered from domestic abuse. And we could just say that. But once you start to unpick it, and this is just a useful technique for unpicking that and selling it, because that's what we're doing all the time, really, is that we're making it as strong as we possibly can. So a feature of the service, so that's the first thing. Well, a feature is the fact that it's free, and it's offered to women on low incomes or living in poverty. Another feature is the fact that all the therapists are qualified, regulated and experienced on the issues. Another feature is the fact that it's an outreach service, so it can take place in women's homes for women who are not leaving home. So and what are the advantages of those features? So in red, the advantages. So, and I've just kind of again unpicked that. So I'll just give one example. By providing a service that is free, we are able to reach and support some of the most vulnerable and isolated women who would not otherwise have access to this service. And then the benefits, the overall benefits of what we're trying to do, which is research shows that specialist regular one-to-one support offers the best chance of improving mental health to aid recovery. And so that's just a technique for helping you to sort of really flesh out what you're doing and sell the benefits. Okay, Charlie, thank you. And there I've just given an example of a project description, again, a live one for us, which talks about the actual activities, the things we're actually going to do and how many people are involved, how frequent that's going to be, and where it's going to be, so that they can really understand the whole of it and what's involved. So when we think about a project, I guess it's just, and again, another useful way of thinking about it is, well, what are all the inputs going into this? So there may be staff, there will be volunteers, there may be some training, some trainers coming along, there might be some equipment, we may need to use a building, there will be materials, and then another one, for example, there will be beneficiaries as well. Okay, Charlie, thank you. And then the outputs or the activities, which I sort of touched on, which sort of really kind of overlaps sometimes with project description. But here, it's really important that the outcomes, the outputs are smart. So very specific things we're going to do, that we're going to be able to measure, that are going to be achievable, so SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time scaled. So, and that although these are quite brief, they do cover those things. Okay, Charlie? Again, and the outcomes also need to be SMART. So a quantitative outcome is, so how many people will benefit? And so here we've got 32 project users will be successfully referred to work or higher education courses in year 1. And Charlie, you happy to move? Oh. And just before we move on to talk about sustainability, there's also the fact that we need to look at qualitative outcomes as well. So that, we'll talk about that a bit later, but when they ask you to list your outcomes, they need to be very, very clear. And of course, you need to be very confident that you will be able to deliver those and report on them. So sustainability is something that's coming up more often these days, again, a bit of a theme. And it's really, I think, that funders want to know that the work they fund, it might have a time scale and then it might end, but is there a way in which that work might carry on? But often it's about your sustainability as an organisation as well, less so perhaps with friends of groups, but let's have a look at some things that might help to convince them that we're sustainable. So one thing is that not being reliant on one income stream to deliver work, that's always worth thinking about. So for example, if you're doing some work, you get that funding, perhaps sometimes you get it from trusts, or you get support from a community foundation or SIL money, or you might get individual donations at events, etc., or a corporate sponsor. It's really good to put that in there, because in the eyes of a funder, that's sort of mitigating any risk, you know, by sharing risks across a number of different income streams. Now, this is just really something that Bristol and Bath Parks Foundation were able to talk about, that we wanted to recruit community champions and establish a Friends of group, which is part of the sustainability of a particular project that we've had funding for. And that's actually what's going to help sustain the benefits in the future and to the community. And we've also talked about the fact that in our case, we want to make applications to support permanent path activators, and we're also wanting to recruit somebody, a Kickstart placement to support that work as well. So there's a number of different ways in which we've talked about our sustainability. Okay, Charlie. Yeah, that's just, we can move on from that. That's just to say, we're going to talk about budgets. And that's very small, so I apologise for that. But basically the budget is a number of items, different types of items. First of all, there's the actual revenue costs. No, that's actually been done differently here. Anyway, there's the cost of a park activator to do the work, which includes employers' national insurance and pension. That may not be relevant to you. There's uniforms. So it's just trying to show you all the different elements that can go into that. Now, in this case, because it's quite a large scale project, we've also need a bit of IT support, refreshments, meeting room space, volunteer expenses, etc., etc. Then you can see some capital costs in there as well. And then finally, you can see there's some management costs, not staff, but the management costs. For this particular application, we were not able to include general overheads, so that's why they're not in there, and utilities and that sort of thing. We have a very small amount of that because we have an office space as well. Charlie, are you happy to move on to the next one? So then what the funder will want to see is, well, how you may be asking for all of the money from one funder, but if not, as not in this case, all the funders want to see who else are you going to, how else are you going to raise that money, and that gives them confidence that as well as the funding you get from them, there's a strong chance you're going to get funding elsewhere. Now, what we sometimes do here is we will put in more than one funder, because if somebody, we put in plan B trusts, okay, so they can see, well, okay, what if they don't get funding from the People's Postcode Lottery? Oh, right, they're going to go to Awards for All, they're going to go to the Heritage. Okay, they've got a plan. They want to see that there's a plan in place. And that plan might also include donations from individuals or some other fundraising work that you might decide to do yourselves as part of that. Okay, thanks, Charlie. And then another key part is evaluation. So how are you going to evaluate whether the project has been successful? I guess when you're talking about maintenance or doing, there's very tangible things which you can talk about that have been done. If a bench has been installed, if an orchard has been planted, and that's a very clear thing. But you might also want to get feedback from residents. So you could hand out some questionnaires, very short, simple questionnaire to people using the park to ask them if, they've benefited from the work that's been done and how that's impacted them. Again, you can do things like survey monkeys or even focus groups. Now, if you're working with people such as, for example, if you were working with people with adults with learning disabilities or youth offenders to do some of that work with you, you want to find out how it's impacted them. So you might do a before and after about how confident they feel about meeting other people, how confident they feel about their skills, and then ask them the same question at the end to see if it's had an impact. And then you can use that when you do your evaluation and report to the funder. Thanks, Charlie. And I've just given an evaluation example there because there's so many different ways that you might choose to do it. Can move on from that one, Charlie. Thank you. Another thing that people are very interested in, funders are very interested in now, is, as well as reporting to us, how might you share what you've learned with other people? And so I've just given an example there. But for example, it could be that, I'm thinking, Bristol Parks Forum, you would share it there potentially. You might run a session at one of their conferences. If you've done something that's worked really well that you want to share with other people, or you might want to share it with other friends of groups that are local to you, so it's worth thinking about that as well. And then other considerations. So I just wanted to talk about a few other things that funders will be thinking about. So one thing is unit cost, and this is more when you are working with people. Let's say the project costs £5,000, but you're going to work with 20 volunteers and 10 ex-youth offenders. That's 30 people are going to be supported, as well as the work you're going to do in the park, which will support people more widely. And so they will then go, well, actually, for that price, it costs this much per person. I hate that word, unit cost, but I know that that's something that will be looked at, particularly when they're thinking about which projects they can and can't fund with the money they've got. So it's worth thinking about that yourself, but also thinking, you see on the other side, they're indirect beneficiaries. So residents who use the park are also beneficiaries. So if you know roughly the footfall, and you're looking to increase the footfall perhaps, and we certainly know there will be considerable footfall coming up for a while, when the only way we can meet people initially is either in our gardens or in parks. But in any case, if you know what the likely footfall is, and you're doing something that's going to benefit people in the park, it's perfectly legitimate to, and that happens all the time, is to make some calculations about that, and that's when you get into quite large numbers of people. But volunteering is so important. I mean, you yourself are volunteers, so you as a group, absolutely count in that. But there might be some more volunteers that you're trying to recruit, local residents, etc. We've talked about supporting disadvantaged groups. I've gone on about that far too much. But sometimes people say user-led, involving project users is one thing, which is really important. So asking local residents, etc., to come, local community groups, and talk about what they want, and making sure they're involved in some way. They may also be the people that are taking part in the activities. But user-led is taking it to another stage where the people who are going to use the park are the people that are involved in really deciding what's going to happen, and leading on that. Gifts in kind is really important, and can often be counted, as well as the income you're hoping to get in. So definitely do mention that. That all adds value, particularly when you're at that point where an assessor or a team of assessors might be, or the trustees might be thinking, gosh, we can't fund all of this. So they're really looking at who can bring the most added value. Something that's not on there, I'll get to match funding in a minute, is how urgent it is. Arguably, all of this work is super urgent. But if you say that it's urgent and you talk about why it's urgent, for example, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, it might be that you are in an area of multiple deprivation and there's a real problem in your park at the moment with antisocial behaviour and other issues. Then say, this is really urgent. Our survey showed that, etc. So it's trying to make the point of why, that it is really urgent, and why can also make a big difference in these situations. And match funding. So some people will require some match funding. I think landfill funds require some match funding. That doesn't mean that the money you ask for them, you must totally match. It might mean that you need to provide some money from elsewhere. It could even be from the council. But yeah, so that you've already got some money pledged, or, that will match fund what you're asking for from them. Sometimes it's that they will only, I'm thinking of one funder that will only, for example, wants you to have 2/3 already sort of in the bag and secured before you go to them. It's not normally so difficult as that. So I also want to just say a little bit about reporting, because in a sense, reporting just flows from the application, because you're just reporting on all the outcomes you've already stated, and your objectives, etc. But and we've kind of covered all of that. But certainly strong reports lead to further funding, absolutely. When you're running sort of trust funding programs, the people that are more likely to fund you are going to be the ones that funded you before, especially if you did a really good report. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So just, make sure that we can commit to everything in the application, and record everything that we've said we're going to do as we go along when we're running the project, ready to report back. But also, as I mentioned before, the qualitative evidence, which is the photos. Funders absolutely love photos, and you're in a fantastic position to produce lots of brilliant photos of before and after, which is great. Testimonials, case studies and quotes, either from people you work with, certainly from residents, and the difference that it's made to them. And then a few other things for you to consider as as friends of groups, which I know most of you are. In your situation, because, and the same for Bristol and Bath Parks Foundation, the council is the landowner, so they may have to issue a letter of support, just a letter of support, or a letter of support to that they will continue to maintain the work that you've done for a set amount of time. Not by no means, not all the time, sometimes. They may have to receive the cash and be responsible for making sure that it's spent properly. I think that is often the case with SIL and landfill, but some others as well. The council may even have to send a letter confirming that they can't afford to do it, and explaining that it's not a statutory requirement, because not everybody is aware of that they do not have a statutory requirement to cover some of the park work that you want to do, or the maintenance, certainly to empty the bins, and there's various other things, but it's important that, because some funders still don't realise that. So there's a few things to think about there. Okay, Charlie? Thank you. Oh, done that one already. I must have put that one in twice, sorry. Want to move on to the next one? So yeah, I just want to say a little bit about building relationships with funders. If you can move on, Charlie, to the next slide. Thank you. So I guess it's worth just thinking about who are the key relationships. I mean, obviously the funders, and that's a big part of what, not a big part, but it is a part of what I do when I'm running big sort of trust programs. It's a really important consideration, but there's a lot of other people that you have to develop those, cultivate those relationships with, such as local councillors, such as the parks departments, and I think the parks coordinators they're called in Bristol, such as volunteers that come and support you, and local residents. So a lot of fundraising really is about relationship building as well, and can be absolutely crucial. So I just want to mention a few ways in which you can influence that with funders. Okay, Charlie, to move on. Brilliant, thank you. So the initial pitch, that all sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? But when we found somebody that we think this could be a really good funder, it's really, really good to ring them. And I think for a long time I used to really have to steel myself and prepare myself to do that, because I think, well, if I don't get it right, you know, I won't get the funding. It's really not that bad, but it's just very useful. So you might want to produce a little script, or just some key points is better, because otherwise it doesn't sound so good when if you're reading it out. But key points that you want to get across about what you're trying to do, and really think about how those match with the criteria that they've put on their website or in their documentation, and have a chat with them. So much information comes out of that. They will offer advice about how to package up your application, what things to highlight, what not to highlight. You know, they can become like a friend to you on the phone, particularly if they feel this strongly about it and it's something they want to support. And if you get the funding, sort of thanking them obviously is important, but you know, by phone as well, where possible, just pick up the phone to them again and say thank you so much for all your help and guidance, and this is going to make such a huge difference, and talk a bit about that to them. Now everybody has to report to funders, so obviously the most brilliant reports really do get noticed. I had to there was a problem with an Awards for All application I did. It got lost in the system, and so I asked the lottery to send it to me, they had a copy, but on the copy they'd written on all these notes. I've never seen that before, never had insight into that, saying this is a very good funder who always does really good reporting. So I've, never forgotten that. It really does leverage further money. And you might want to, but what's really good is to send them updates. Okay, so the thing you absolutely have to do is put in the application. If you get the money, thank them, and then do the reporting, as they say, within, normally it's 12 months. But what about all the other things you could do? So you could send them little updates, perhaps a copy of a newsletter if you did one, or a press clipping, or if you did a radio interview, feedback from a resident, or just a note that somebody's put in a card who took part in something, or just a 6-month update, even though you don't have to update them for 12 months. They really do remember these things. It makes a big difference. And of course, inviting them, again, something that can work really well for Friends of groups, is that you could invite them to come and see what you've done as well. And there's just a copy of a thank you letter, which is just really wanted to say, so it's not just to thank them, but it's to actually really talk to them about the difference they could make, either to a person or to the space, to the environment. And so just there as an example, that's all. That's gone really quickly. Well, it has for me anyway. Charlie, do you want to, I don't know if we could perhaps look at what's in the chat to see if there's anything there?
Yeah, sure. So we haven't had a huge number of questions as we've been going through. I imagine people have been concentrating intensely because there's so much stuff within that.
I know it's a lot to get through, isn't it?
It is, but I'll kick us off with a quick question, Jo, because I know that one of the things that it took me quite a while to get my head around when I was kind of preparing or thinking about something I wanted to do project-wise for a charity, and articulating that in a funding application is kind of the difference between the outcomes, outputs and activities, and how best to frame those. Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that? And in the meantime, if anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the chat box, or maybe because we've got a bit more time than expected, we could unmute people.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. That's a really good point. So the outputs, well, they are the activities, the actual things that you're going to do. So in fact, I wonder if it's worth having a look at a slide that shows that. So maybe if we say, thinking about the work that we're doing at the moment, we will offer gardening activities to a group of 10 residents, consisting of 2 hours run by a park ranger in a certain part of the park. Maybe, so we're providing detail, but we're not talking about the impact. So then when you talk about outcomes means impact. In fact, if I just said activities and then impact, that would be a lot better, wouldn't it? So the impact on that person might be that it's increased their mental well-being, and we can evidence that we've done that by asking them in a survey or questionnaire at the end of the project, as well as asking them to say how they're feeling perhaps beforehand. So as I say, it's getting that baseline and then coming back to it at the end, or that they've it's the social interaction is important, that it reduced social isolation. So you're looking, so that's when we're talking about people, but we also need to talk about, I suppose, some of the impacts in terms of the work in the parks. So an easier one would be, but I want to come to some of the more difficult ones as well. Let's see if we can work those out. So an easier one might be if you've increased access in some way by creating a path that means that people with disabilities or people, you know, with children in prams and things like that, find it easier and actually are now able to access the park more frequently, or in fact access it at all. So, but I'm just thinking as I go along. So let's say it's an orchard or something. It's easy to talk about planting the orchard and all the different aspects of that, but the impact of that orchard is where, again, you need to get that feedback from people using the park. And the sort of things you want to find out is, well, you know, have they learnt anything? So maybe if there's some display boards and things, you know, have they, you know, have they learnt something new? Have they made use of the orchard? And has it increased, you know, the quality of their experience when they're in the park? Trying to think of a few others.
Nature connectedness is always a really good one and very topical for the moment. For most things, when you're getting people to be spending more time in parks, you can talk about the opportunities to connect with nature, to connect with other people, and to be more active. Those are always our fallbacks, because that ticks all of the health and well-being boxes that most funders are looking for at the moment.
Yeah. So so yeah. So what I didn't mention there was physical. So it's you know, health, physical health, and also mental well-being. Yeah. Shall I have a look at, we have a look at some of the ones that are in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So we've got a few coming in now, which is great. So Becky Smith says, we're a new group and won't have any previous funding when we start to apply for grants. Is there somewhere we can go to for support? And Becky, just to reassure you, the foundation was in exactly this position a year ago. So we know where you're coming from, and there are funders out there who are happy to take what I suppose is associated as a risk to fund new groups and organisations. But Jo's well versed in this, having had to do this with us.
Absolutely.
For the best part of a year.
I think I would say it's all the other things we've talked about, which we can talk about to really strengthen your application, about, you know, the impact you're going to have, the people that you're going to involve, the difference it's going to make. Is it an area that I mean, it might not be, but you know, if it's an area that's run down or neglected, if you know, access isn't great for some people, all those things are really key, and the nature connectedness. So yes, we did have to write our first application with nothing that we'd ever done before, but obviously once we got some money in, it did help, but we still did get that money in. So I wouldn't be put off by that. I really wouldn't. In fact, if you are a new group and nobody's doing that work, I mean, sort of turn that around a bit. You know, there is a gap here. We want to fill that gap by coming in and doing this work that hasn't been done.
And often as well, one of the benefits is if that you're a group that's been around for a while and you've been doing fantastic stuff for many years, that is your track record. The fact that you haven't made a trust or foundation grant application before doesn't make any difference to the fact that you've been doing things on the ground. Yeah, our biggest challenge was that we were a new charity and we weren't formed out of an existing community organisational group, so we had no track record, no income record. But yeah, for most groups that have been around for more than a year, you'll have plenty to be talking about. Brilliant. So next question, and also just to say, Becky, that yes, as the foundation, we are around to help and support groups with applications. I'm really pleased to say we have a fundraising lead joining the foundation at the beginning of May. It's one of those situations where I think if we said we could support absolutely everybody across Bristol and Bath who wanted help with an application, we'd end up not ever doing anything else. But if you need a quick chat or a sounding board to kind of work through your approach, or a quick skim of what you're going to be doing, please do get in touch with us. Excellent. So sorry, moving on then. Guy Morkson has a question around SIL funding. So what would the first port of call be to access a SIL grant? Would you make contact with your local councillor?
Yeah, definitely. And I talked to Rob, who runs Bristol Park Forum, about this, and yeah, I think the working through a local councillor is key. Yeah, even in Baines where it's not essential, we both know, Charlie, that it makes a huge difference. But it's absolutely key in both Bath and Bristol. It's really important. Do you want to say anything about that, Charlie? Because you work with local councillors quite a lot, don't you? I mean,
yeah, I mean, as you'll all know, having your local councillor on side through any of your work is really valuable, isn't it? Because they can help you reach different groups, they can open doors for you if need be within the council, whether that's about running your project or accessing funding. So yeah, I'd always recommend building good relationships with your local councillor, whether that's at ward level or and your MPs as well, to an extent, treating them similarly to the way that you do funders, inviting them along to things, making sure they're in the loop before things happen in their area, helps them feel like they are on top of things, and they're far more likely to support you in any of your initiatives moving forward. And obviously, if you've got that relationship already, then when you're looking for money, you can kind of bring them in as a bit of an insider into it and get them on side. That's definitely an approach that's worked well for us in Bath. We've been working really closely with one of the local councillors there, and we actually received a grant through their Councillors Empowerment Fund, which was entirely up to them how they spent it. So would, yeah, really recommend getting your councillors on board, but I'm pretty sure that's bread and butter to a lot of you. Yes, so just to reassure everyone, because this has come up a few times, I will make Joe's PowerPoint presentation and the recording of this available afterwards. So please don't worry, if there's anything you've missed, you can come back through and watch it at another time. Brilliant. So moving on, Caroline from Arnes Vale would like to know why there are fewer opportunities available to unconstituted groups. Is it practical reasons, less reliable? They are an informal group, and if they decided to apply for any grants, they would definitely need to find a friendly group with a bank account to work with us to lodge any funds won.
I mean, I would say the main thing is it's just risk, really, for the potential fund. I mean, certainly with a lot of funders, you know, they're like the lottery, for example, they're spending money that's come into them through the general public, whether it's Heritage Lottery, Arts Council, National Community Lottery Fund, you know, and they're accountable to them. And I think it's just, they feel that it's just more of a risk if you're not a legally sort of constituted organisation. Yeah, that's the main thing I can think of. My brain's gone blank. What would you say, Charlie?
Yeah, no, it's risk management. If you're registered with the Charity Commission, you have to publish your accounts every year. There's a huge amount of scrutiny over charities, and it means that you have a good level of certainty that that money will be spent appropriately, and without certain checks and balances in places, it is considered more high risk. One thing I would mention is, for some of you may know that we've been raising, as the Bristol Bath Parks Foundation, we've been raising money over the last year for the Love Your Park Community Fund. And this is going to be a bit of a pilot project that we're hoping to be able to launch later in the year. We've got a little bit more fundraising to do. But the idea behind this is that we would be able to make small grants available, no more than £1,000, so quite small, to park groups across Bristol and Bath, and really trying to remove some of those barriers to entry. So we wouldn't necessarily expect you to have your own bank account. We could spend the money on your behalf to get you the materials that you need. You definitely wouldn't need to be a registered charity. We're exploring, kind of looking at the difference between the very informal groups and constituted, and really pushing to make sure that we can support the very informal groups as well, because we recognise that so much of the work that park groups do across both Bristol and Bath are what makes our park so special. And the fact that you can't access that funding so easily at the moment from the bigger funders is a real challenge. And we hope that any groups that are successful in getting funding through the Love Your Park Community Fund, that will provide a bit of a stepping stone experience, understanding how the process works, so that you'd be able to go on and get more funding from the larger, more typical funders that Joe's been talking about today. So do keep your eyes peeled for that a bit later in the year. Lovely. So a kind of follow-on question actually from Caroline is that they're thinking about planting a number of small trees in the park. And an alternative that she's suggesting to secure that money could be local fundraising, or even writing directly to local organisations to ask if they would sponsor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the focus of this presentation has all been about bid writing to trusts and foundations, etc. But yes, I mean, that's, you know, definitely another alternative route, and a good one, you know, is going to local corporates and doing your own fundraising initiatives. I mean, obviously at the moment there's not much going on around events, challenge events, etc. But people raise money through all sorts of ways, don't they, Charlie? So it's not, you know, not just about bid writing. And as I think I mentioned, if you can show that you've raised money yourself for things, again, that's another strong point with funders, whether it's for this the project you're asking them for or something you've done in the past.
Absolutely, and so this is the first in what we hope will be a series of training about fundraising over the next year. We've actually got funding from a trust and foundation to put this specific training on, the Isla Foundation, and they're all about supporting grassroots organisations to do stuff. So I'd really recommend having a look at them as well on your list. But we hope to be in a position kind of in the next 6 months or so where we might have a person joining the team who's going to really focus on the support that we can offer friends of groups and other park groups across both cities, and pulling together, as I say, a programme of training on other fundraising methods will be a key part of that, because it wasn't just trusts that people were interested in. A huge number of people were interested in small fundraising projects like, I don't know, calendars or bits and pieces like that, events as well, and also kind of community fundraising. So those things are on our list, and I promise we'll get to them in due course. Brilliant. So a quick one from Henry on gardening training. Because many of their volunteers have little gardening experience, I'll kind of jump in on this one. I'm not actually sure. I haven't seen any kind of horticultural training that's free or available to friends of groups. There's a huge amount available through like the Royal Horticultural Society, but a lot of it is paid for. So let me kind of take that away and have a think. Unless anybody within this group knows, it's a good chance to ask a hive mind whether there's any kind of gardening or horticultural training. I'd imagine potentially that the Avon Wildlife Trust does some, though, because this is very much their bread and butter, and their Grow Wilder site. There you go, Becky has come in and said there's a wildlife gardening club through the Avon Wildlife Trust. And I'd also really recommend, if you've got council operatives or charge hands working in your park to do any maintenance, a lot of them have a huge kind of wealth of experience in horticultural and are often pretty fed up that they are reduced to just cutting the grass and emptying the bins. So always worth asking one of them if there's anyone that you kind of know and recognise that's around quite a lot. And yeah, BCC will also do some limited training for free. And Jackie, I haven't seen one of those for a while, but I'll keep my eyes peeled and make sure that we promote that when it comes around. But it's something I'm talking to Ella Hogg and Jeremy Diamond about kind of informally over the last few years, and we'll see what we can do to get something like that sorted.
They will if you ask them, because they're coming to us in 2 weeks' time.
Ah, brilliant. There you go. Often, if you one of those things, if you ask, it's more likely to happen. Excellent. So just having a quick look. So Russ has asked, are there any other lists of funding providers who are best suited for small, medium and large amounts of capital?
Without doing the searches, no, but I could potentially pull something together.
That would be great, Jo.
That, you know, just some of the key ones.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you could, would you be able to distribute that, Charlie?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So let me do that.
Fantastic. So yeah, if we could get a list of not just capital, a list of funders who are likely to fund any kind of parks projects for groups of the varying sizes that we've been talking about. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I'll put that on a table or something. Yeah,
great. So Peter has asked, made a comment actually, that he can verify that talking with a potential funder works to develop a relationship. and they will help you with explanations about what they're looking for in an application. Peter, I don't know if you've got a specific example. I don't know if you want to flesh that out for the group.
I was just going to write it into the chat there. It's Travel West in particular, who we've got a small grant from them. Never applied for anything before. It wasn't onerous, but I did communicate with, and I forget the lady's name there, that's his name, but you know, just a telephone call, because particularly their application forms seem to be designed for companies, for corporates. So they said, you know, I got all this form and said, well, can we apply for this? And they said, oh yeah, of course you can. Well, why is your form designed for corporates? Oh yeah, we need to do something about that, don't we? So don't think just because their forms designed for corporates, how many people do you employ, how do they travel to work, etc., etc. Oh, just put a dash through those boxes. Well, thanks, you know. But and yeah, and then they came back when they were on the point of awarding us the grant and said, what's your VAT registration number? What's your company registration number? Well, as I explained before, we're a friends group, and it wasn't a problem, and the money appeared in the bank account just like that. Modest sum, but it was for a walk, marking out a exercise trail in Manor Woods Valley. But it's, you know, that's, you know, think of Travel West, they're into cycling and how people get to work and things like this. But they were happy to fund this to 2.5k marked out trail. So yeah, it's worth giving it a go.
Brilliant.
But once you're on first name terms with someone, you're on first name terms with emails and stuff. Then, you know.
Makes
that does help. I think sure it helps.
Yeah, brilliant. Oh, make a note of that one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
And Graham's got a question kind of around whether infrastructure projects are out of scope for friends of groups to carry out when they don't own the land. Graham, do you want to just tell us a bit more about what you're thinking with that?
Well, it was just that a lot of the things that we as a friends group for Hedgemead Park in Bath, they're all about infrastructure improvements. And, you know, my feeling is that as a constituted group, although we have got a bank account, we're not strictly, don't have any formal identity. And I'm not entirely sure whether that means that we can contract with tradespeople or buy, you know, equipment or materials that are needed to, say, reinstate a wall that's falling down or anything like that. Clearly, we'd need, you know, the permission of the council to do all this. But in terms of applications for grant money, I just wondered whether that would rule us out or whether we would necessarily have to collaborate with the council in order to go for money like that. It's all about ownership of when we're concentrating on a piece of land that we don't own, that doesn't belong to us.
I think there are quite a few funders that you could go to from the list that I showed earlier. I mean, it does get complicated, and sometimes you do need to sort of prove that the council are on board or that they might manage the money or something. But when I send around the list, I think the best thing to do is if I also indicate which ones are relevant to what the most of you actually is sort of constituted, but not a registered charity. So you've got your set of you've got your bank account and all those sorts of things. I mean, I'm sort of thinking like Quartet Community Foundation and people like that.
I guess to an extent, it kind of just, I think it depends on the scale of the project, Graham.
Yeah.
I know different groups tend to approach this in different ways, and I always use Rob and Troopers Hill as an example, but when they've done more sizable projects there, they've secured the money themselves as Troopers Hill, and it's come into their bank account. But if it's going to be a really complicated project to manage with a huge number of contractors and liabilities that frankly you don't want to sit with you, depending on your relationship with the council and how much capacity they've got, sometimes they can arrange the work and you then pay them for it, if that makes sense. So I think there are various ways around it, and I just say to everybody, start off by talking to, in Bristol, your area coordinator or your area manager, and in Bath there's fewer people to deal with, so sometimes can be a bit easier, but they're slightly more stretched in some senses. But yeah, start off with the council and have a chat with them about what you want to do and how they can help you make that happen.
Yes.
Ooh.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Joe, is there anything else you'd add to that?
No, but I will, where I can find out, I will show when I send the list over, which will also include what I've showed in the presentation, but other specific trusts, where you can apply as a constituted group, which is not a registered charity, and where you can apply as an informal group, if there are any. So I'll put all that on the table. Yeah.
Brilliant. I think just to say that if you're an informal group at the moment, taking the steps that are needed to become a constituted groups can seem like a lot of work, but there's a lot of support out there to help with that. In Bristol, we have got VOSCA, the voluntary organisation sector, something, but VOSCA, who provide a huge amount of support to groups and organisations on things like governance and setup and kind of the background administrative stuff. Loads of templates and bits and pieces like they're out there that you can pinch and essentially copy and paste your group's name into. No shame in doing that in the charity sector. There's no point in reinventing the wheel often. Make the most of the kind of resources and experience that people around you have. In Baines, it's 3SG on the whole. And then I'd also say that the Bristol Parks Forum, whether you're in Bristol or Bath, has a whole host of resource and kind of advice on how to take your group onto that next level if you want to. Obviously, it does take more work, so that is something to consider. But yes, just wanted to give that a little plug because it will make accessing grants a little bit easier if you're an informal group at the moment.
Somebody also wrote on here, Charlie, that if you are an informal group, it's not just park groups. That's a really good point. It's not just park groups or even residents associations. There's all kinds of other community groups that may exist that you could talk to. So yeah, it's not just the other park groups.
Definitely. And also just to say, if you're an informal group and there's a local community organisation that's a registered charity or a constituted group that you've worked with really closely or quite well, consider making a joint application. It doesn't always have to be you doing it together. I'm pretty sure, Joe, you've already mentioned this, but just to reiterate, so if you can go in partnership, they could be the named charity on the bid. And you can benefit from their governance structures and the trust that these institutions have in an organisation with that structure. But you can then co-deliver that project, or even if you're doing the majority of it, it helps to demonstrate you've got that local buy-in and support. And actually, partnership bids are often considered as being stronger than standalone bids.
Yeah. And I'd like to, there's a list of grants on the Bristol Parks Forum, so I'll pull all that together into the one table.
That would be great. And actually, Joe, that's probably a good place to host it moving forward. If you kind of have a look at your list and make any tweaks, we could maybe keep it updated and live on the Bristol Parks Forum website.
Yeah. Yes.
While we're in a slight interim phase with our website at the moment. It's being transferred onto a better supplier, so not the best place for these things for the time being. Brilliant. Well, does anybody have any further questions for Joe? No? Excellent. Well, hopefully this has given you a good idea of what it takes to access grants for your work and to get more projects going in our parks, which is obviously what we're all about. It is a bit of an art form and it does take practice. But I think Joe's points about building relationships with the funders is absolutely crucial because it just takes a huge amount of the stress out of the whole process. Once you've got over that first phone call and you know someone there, it then all feels a lot more natural in terms of asking questions and feeling like you've got someone in that organisation supporting your application.
Sorry, yes.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, and I don't at all be put off by it because actually they don't want sort of, sort of fundraising copy from bid writers. So for part what I have to do is make sure it doesn't look like that. They want to hear from local the people who are working, at grassroots, who are doing the work. they don't want to have anything to do with professional fundraisers. So, you know, you're in a really good position. Don't at all be put off by it in any way.
Absolutely. And yeah, you'll get when you start having a look for what's out there and you start getting a feel for what all the different application forms are like. It's it all just starts to feel a bit more natural. I've only started doing kind of trust and grant applications in the last 2 years, and admittedly I've had a lot of support from Joe telling me to be more specific and usually realistic as well, but you will get there with experience and time. And as I say, we're on hand to help with that once our fundraiser is in post, and hopefully someone else later down the line to do kind of direct support for friends of groups. We really want to be playing an active role in helping you get more money in to do more great stuff, because you guys are the lifeblood of our parks and are what make them so special. So do keep an eye out for that small grant programme when it launches. We've actually got one kind of final fundraising push for it coming up on the 22nd of April. We've been successful in getting a spot on the Big Give Green Match programme, which is where the Big Give matches all the donations you get over the course of a week. And if we hit our £5,000 target, we'll be able to move quickly into planning to deliver this, which is fantastic. So do keep an eye out for that. And just finally, a huge thank you to Joe for taking the time to do this, and thank you to all of you for putting a couple of hours across your evening. I really appreciate it. And because we have funders who are funding this, I'd really appreciate it if you could complete the survey form that I send to you after this meeting, because that is what we will use to report back to our funders, demonstrate impact, and make sure that we can get further funding from them in the future. It's all about the relationship. So do keep an eye out for that, which will come to you probably tomorrow at some point, alongside the recording and Joe's presentation. So thank you all. Really looking forward to hopefully seeing you all face to face at some point in park soon.
Yes.
You know where we are if you need anything, and take care. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.